E.T. phone home.
That worked nice. That got straight.
Well, I feel about today much the same way I felt about it in 1982, which is that it's just a little piece of wonderment in my life. This little guy came into my life and then everybody else's and kind of did his magic. And I feel very beholden to him. I owe a lot to this creature from another world. It'll be sadder if it's happy sad. You know what I'm saying? And I also feel like I made my most personal film in 1982 with E.T. And to this day, I think it remains my most personal film.
I'm keeping him.
Elliot.
What's happening? Oh no.
All right, let's see the line advancing a little bit. That's fine.
All the kids in the movie are combinations of myself and my own family growing up. I had the idea when I was actually a kid, starting to make movies, wondering how to fill the needs that all young, lonely kids have growing up. And instead of filling the need with a terrestrial family member, I filled the need with an imaginary creature from outer space. And I think E.T. was really about the divorce of my parents. Mary's husband, Elliot's father, is in Mexico with Sally.
Where's Mexico?
At the time when I did the press junket and met all the reporters and talked about the movie, I never once said this was inspired by the divorce of my parents. But it always had been in the back of my mind to someday be able to just come out and confess that, which I think I did about 10 years ago in an interview. I finally came out and said, well, look, it's really based on that. I had been living with the story for so many years. I remember that when I made Close Encounters, and I had been living with the story of E.T. before Close Encounters, I had been involved and very preoccupied with extraterrestrial possibilities. And I remember when Richard Dreyfuss walked into the mothership, it made me sad, but not that sad. But when the little E.T. we called Puck, who Carlo Rambaldi also designed and built, when he returned to the mothership, I was really sad. I wanted that guy to stay back on Earth. And I thought, man, there's a powerful story there. So that just continued to feed my thinking about, I really want to continue. I know I have another story in me, and I always knew I didn't know it was going to be called E.T., but it was always going to be about a boy who finds an alien. I had that story from childhood in my brain. And I pretty much had a lot of it worked out when I asked Melissa to write it. We were making Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was in Tunisia at the time. I was in the desert, and it was between shots, and I was picking up seashells because once the desert was the bottom of an ocean, so there's all these prehistoric seashells everywhere. I was collecting them. And I was just talking to Melissa, and I was telling her the story of E.T., and I had loved Black Stallion, which she had co-authored. And I said, Melissa, you would be so great. And Melissa at first turned me down. She said, I'm not a writer. I'm down on myself this month about writing. And she didn't want to do it. So we all worked on her. Kathy Kennedy worked on her. I worked on her until finally she relented and said, okay, I'll write it.
We determined that it would be a family with an absentee father. There would be a separation, so there would be the poignancy of that situation in the house, that the little man would somehow fill a spot he didn't know he was filling. We had to know who Elliot was specifically. And what surprised us is knowing that we needed to determine who E.T. was, because he was a character more than just a presence or a surprise or a visitation. He was a guy. So we developed his character. We developed what he would look like.
Ouch.
Healing was something that came up pretty early. Actually, I remember that I asked kids what superpower they would want, either to have themselves or to have this man from outer space have. And healing came up a lot, that he could take care of hurts. We did know he was a farmer. He's an agricultural worker. He's a drone. He's out collecting, but their affinity was to plant life. So then we sort of thought there had to be sort of a squishy, earthy, muddy kind of feeling about him. Personally, I never imagined what his planet looked like. It was just that he was out to collect foliage, bring home the seeds.
Come on, hurry up.
Don't be pushy, pushy.
The dynamic of the trio was really important and successful, I think. Knew Elliot had to be a middle child, so certainly older brother is kind of obvious, and the younger sister. I can't remember how this was decided, But in my life, I had always been a big babysitter, and there were many children in my life, even before I had my own. My husband had 2 children who were the ages of the boys. So there was a lot of eavesdropping and stealing and lifting. I would work for 4 or 5 days, and then I would go meet with Stephen, and we'd go over what I had, and I'd go back, and I'd fix it, change it, move on, have another 5 days in, go back, we'd go over it and over it and over it. Probably for an original screenplay, that's very unusual to have that kind of collaboration going on as you're working. It was smooth and fast. It's never happened that easily again. It was 8 weeks, and it just flew by.
And I read the screenplay. Kathy Kennedy was there, and I came running into the dining room, and I said, I just read E.T. We're making it now. I said, this is great.
Okay. All right, so now we start right with the temperature one.
She only really did a first draft for me. I pretty much shot a first draft. There were revisions, but they were kind of revisions that she'd do on the set or on the, it was inspired work on Melissa's part, and it was ready to shoot the day I read the script.
I like to try to get this shot here before we break. Action.
Elliot, look what I made for you.
I was 6, and I was just incredibly aware at that time. I feel like I remember everything as if it was yesterday. I met with Stephen on Poltergeist, but he thought that I was more right for E.T., so it was, there was nothing wrong with that in my mind. I thought, okay, great. I'm glad to know you think I'm more right for something.
A little bit to your left, Drew. A little bit to your left. Right there. Look at him.
Drew was the first person I hired on the movie, and I had met a lot of possible Gerties. But when Drew came in and began to tell me that she was a punk rock and roll band leader, she's 6 years old, and she's telling me she has a punk band, and that she makes up her face with paint, and thousands of people flock to her concerts.
I told him I had a band called the Purple People Eaters. It was a punk rock band, and I was the drummer. It was, early 80s, late 70s. Punk rock was really big then, so I was incredibly into it and thought it was super cool to be in a punk rock band. And he just empowered me to believe that, sure, if I wanted to be in a punk rock band, I could certainly be in a punk rock band. And that's sort of, I think, what every person on this planet needs, is someone to help them realize their dreams and help them find their destiny and to believe in them and to make you feel like you could reach your potential.
And then your mouth gets bigger, bigger, and scream.
I said, I could use that imagination in this picture. She could help me make my movie better. I thought she was one of the most remarkable children I had ever met. And I immediately, hired her.
He's really real.
The
Why are all those wires? Those aren't wires, those are his feet.
Valenzuela here. Valenzuela.
Henry's screen test was a revelation for me, because I was about at the end of my rope. I could not find Elliot. Jack Fisk, Sissy Spacek's husband, had just worked with Henry, and they cobbled together a few scenes in 35 millimeter and showed me Henry. I love the way Henry looked. I couldn't tell about his acting because the scenes were very visual, but I wanted to just see what he would be like, saying a lot of dialogue, and so I brought him in to meet me.
Yeah. Henry? Great. You okay?
Yeah.
That was terrific. What?
I met Stephen when I was 9 years old. I had come out to LA for the first time. I was from San Antonio, Texas. That's where I was living. And I came out to Universal and had an audition.
And I said, let's make something up. Let's do an improvisation.
There's a knock on your door and a man comes in, a grown man, not your brother. And he's from NASA.
I just said that you have a best friend, and this is a creature. It's a best creature friend. And there is a man that's going to come into your house, and he's going to be from the government, and he's going to try to get you to give this friend of yours back to him. And Henry, whatever you have to do, you stop him.
Now, young man, I understand that you have an alien somewhere in this house. Is that true?
And Mike Fenton, the casting director, played the government man.
Well, is it true?
You can't take him.
Well, I'm afraid I have to, son.
Can't take him away, he's mine.
But it's not my choice. The president asked me to come here and get him.
I don't care what the president
I got the part. It was the fastest auditioning process I've ever been on.
Okay, kid, you got the job. And action.
Michael! Get the bikes. Meet us at the playground at the top of the hill.
I was doing a play in New York off Broadway. A lot of people were seeing it and having me come in and read for other projects. And one of them was a movie called The Entity. And I went in for that and I didn't get the part in that. And the casting director, she said, well, you know, I'm really sorry that you didn't get this, but I hear that Spielberg is casting something that you might be right for. They arranged an interview, which was the day that President Reagan was shot. And so it was kind of hectic, the audition, because it wasn't even an audition, it was just a meeting with Spielberg. And I went in and I was just starry-eyed because Close Encounters was my favorite all-time movie, and I was starstruck, and all this stuff was going on with the shooting. And then I sat down with him and I felt instantly comfortable, and he made me feel relaxed. He asked me what my interests were, and I said, well, I like bike riding. And he said, that's in the movie. And then I said, I like Dungeons and Dragons, and he goes, well, that's in the movie too. They had me back for several other auditions with other people that were trying out for Elliot and some of the other parts. He didn't say, kid, you got the part to me, but later, you know, they had me back in and I got the part.
I know what you should do. Let's do it with the window up. Okay. And that'll help you shout more, you know what I mean?
Robert was sort of the typical teenager, you know, in the picture. You know, he was always torturing and teasing his brother, the way I'm certainly, you know, guilty as charged of teasing my sisters growing up.
How you feeling, faker?
I'm feeling fine. Look.
So I put a lot of myself into Robert's character. I put myself in actually all the characters, but I remember specifically Robert, you know, where the hand comes in. And
He came back? Oh my God!
that stuff that I did to my sisters to just make them nuts when I was growing up. And it was fun to let Robert be a bit of my alter ego. And he was the oldest.
Excellent.
But Elliot was the wisest.
Swear as my only brother on our lives.
Don't get so heavy, I swear.